on this computer. The recording is now in progress. I will scooch all these participants over. Hopefully we're all in the right place. We are here to talk about the 2021 Public Library Annual Report and how to complete it. Our agenda today is that we're going to start with some basics about where to find the form, how to move around it in Excel. We're going to spend some time looking at specific questions within the form. These are questions that I often get emails about from you guys, from directors and administrators who are filling out the form. So we'll talk about those today. And I will end with some important takeaways for you. Just some advice from me, since I've been doing this for a few years, just to leave you with that a little bit of advice. I would like to say at this point that I am going to repeat things you have heard before. This is probably the second year. This is the second year that I've offered these webinars on how to complete the annual report. So if you attended one of these annual report webinars last year, and if you have been paying attention with the other webinars about the new questions, changes, programs and activities, you're probably up to speed. So I am definitely going to say things that you have heard before. And in fact, I am today using a very similar script to what I used a year ago for this webinar. So I apologize if you've heard this all before. I will not be offended if you choose to drop out at some point and go allocate your time elsewhere. Not a problem. And the recording is always available to you. But I will probably say things you've heard before, including what I always like to start with is a reminder about the differences between the state annual report that we send to IMLS and your own reports and the data that you're collecting to tell your story at your library. So again, just as a reminder, our state report really feeds into the National Public Library Survey that IMLS coordinates. And many of our questions come to us from IMLS, and these are nationwide questions that every public library in every state in the country, and in fact in some of the territories, are answering. So it's a consistent set of questions, apples to apples, but it can take a while to change some of those questions if we ever wanted to change them. So we are working with those specific questions and their definitions that go with them. And that's why I have to be really sticky about certain things. In addition, each state can add some questions to the annual report, and we do that in Connecticut. We add a few questions, not as many as Massachusetts does, but we do have some. And this year you'll be able to see in a very specific column which questions are specific to Connecticut and which are nationwide questions or feed into nationwide questions. So that will help give you a little perspective about where the data is going and how we're using it. So our state annual report, again, is a consistent body of questions, but it does not represent everything that your library does. And I know this. I know there's one question, one in the annual report about reference transactions. And you know your library is doing more work than is represented by one question, right? Like you have an entire department to answer reference questions. So I do encourage you to keep your own statistics. If you want to get more granular about what kind of reference questions you're answering, please do that. You know, if you want to get more granular about certain other things, or if you want to collect different kinds of data that aren't included in your annual report, please do that, because that will help tell the story of your library. You can use that information when you're talking to your funders, your boards, your capital F friends, your patrons, your community, everybody. So just keep those distinctions in mind. Sometimes people say, well, where do I put this thing in the annual report? And I say, well, you don't. But if that thing is important to you and important to the story of your library, go ahead and keep tracking it. Go ahead and tell people about it because it has meaning in your community. So just keep in mind those distinctions as we go along. Okay, we're going to hop out of this particular thing. And we're going to go over to our annual report page here. So a lot of the information that we're talking about today is on the LibGuide. And oops, sorry, let me see if I can pull up my list of participants. I'm just going to make sure everybody's muted as we go along. Okay. Great. All right. I don't see anything in the chat. Make sure you're using that chat if you have questions as we go along. As a reminder, our annual report always covers the period July 1 through June 30. And there's a reminder in the report form about what that is. So that's always the time frame that we're working with. And it's always due annually by November 15. That's written into the state statute. So make sure that you're meeting that particular deadline as we go along. And sometimes you'll be tracking things throughout the year, like programs, you're counting the number of programs and activities throughout the year. And sometimes you're counting as of June 30. So for instance, all the collections questions are about your holdings as of June 30. Please continue to keep yourselves muted unless you do have a specific question. Thank you so much. Let's see. And as a reminder, if you're not tracking your stats according to the annual report categories, you might consider doing that to make your job a little easier as we go along. So especially I think with regard to circulation stats, programs, you know, as much as you can collect data each month, that's going to immediately feed into your annual report. I think your life is going to be a little bit easier as you're collecting all this information. Also, just a reminder to strive for consistent counting from year to year. Consistency matters and accuracy matters. So leave yourself some notes, which you can do in the form, you can do in a notebook, you can do in documentation to yourself. But as you're going through this process, figure out, you know, how do I come up with this number? And then make notes for yourself so you remember a year from now how you got to that answer. I can assure you, I have to make notes for myself every single time, right? Because there are things that I also do only once a year. And I have pages and pages and pages of notes about how to do it so that I can recreate it in the same way. So that consistency is really helpful from year to year so that you are representing consistent data for your library. All right, so here we are on our LibGuide, and let me see if I can put this into the chat here in case you guys need that to follow along. But I am going to send you an email at about noon today with this link to the LibGuide so you can find this information again, find the recording. And it will also have an evaluation form link there as well in the email that you'll get around noon today. But while we're here, I just want to show you, so we're on the annual report tab. Let me scroll back up again. So this statistics page, Statistics for Connecticut Public Libraries, is a really deep resource. It is really rich. It is detailed. There is a ton of information in this LibGuide, like numbers galore. So there's a lot there. And sometimes I move it around and it's in a different place. So if you are convinced that you've seen something there before and it's not there now, let me know, because you were probably right and I probably moved it. But on the statistics LibGuide, we start with the statistical profile tab, this very first tab. And that's the profile, that's all of the information collated that you individually send to me. So I'll be able to launch that probably in January. We'll have the profile ready. Today, we're going to talk about this annual report tab. All the things we discuss will be under here, but there's some great other tabs here that I encourage you to take a look at and play around with. Lots of info there. Now, as we scroll a little lower on the annual report page, there's a box here with some additional tabs, right? So lots of information. This 2021 annual report tab right here has all of the info, the form, lots of good stuff. Let me scroll back up to the top. Just a reminder here of the deadline, the summary, some points here about how to complete the form, a little bit of background info. My contact info is here. Here's a list of the webinars that I have specifically about how to complete the annual report. You'll see here's a webinar right now, the one we're in right this minute. So once we are done today, I'm going to load the recording up to YouTube, and this link will turn from register to recording. So when we come back, you'll be able to find the recording link right here. As we scroll down, there is a short little video here that recaps how to use the form, some of the things that I'll be saying today. Here's the form itself, the actual Excel report. This is what you're going to click on and download when you're ready to start. We'll come back to this. And as we scroll down, a lot more documentation here. So if you just wanted to print off the list of questions, you could do that right there. If you just wanted to print off all the instructions and definitions, you could do that right there. And here's some additional info about how to complete it, FAQs, all kinds of library stats, tons of info right there. As we scroll back up, this tab right here, the second tab, changes to 2021 reports. This is a lot of information that I have covered in other webinars. You can see the recordings here. So if you are interested in learning about what those changes were, you can watch one of the recordings or check the Zoom slides right here, the info session slides. And then as we scroll down, there are links to all of the new questions, whether they're Connecticut or IMLS questions. There are a lot of clarifications, a lot of COVID questions. So if you're kind of wondering what were those changes, this tab will tell you, as well as the recordings and the slides. Also, this tab right here, programs, is increasingly important. You will have heard, hopefully by now, that this year's report really has a lot more questions about programs and activities. IMLS has busted all of those questions out into huge level of detail, really because they're interested in tracking programs and their impact on your community. And as we've seen over the past few years, program numbers are the number that is consistently going up, while circulation and visitation tend to go down nationwide. So that's an important story. But if you are doing program and activity counts, I strongly recommend that you use this spreadsheet, which will help you keep track of your data so that you can answer these questions more easily next year and in future years. There are a couple of videos here, this first one, and then the pro tips with information on how to use the spreadsheet. Strongly recommend you watch those before you send me an email with questions, because I'm going to say I answered that in the email. Here it is at minute 13:52 in the video. So I'm going to always refer you back to that video first if you ask me a question. And here are some additional recordings about programs and activities, and a lot of information as we go down, definitions, examples, all that good stuff. So a ton of info online about programs. Now, we're going to backtrack to this tab, 2021 Annual Report, and let's actually open this thing and start talking about it. It is an Excel form, so when you click on it and open it, you'll have to download it. And make sure that you enable editing. If you put this up on Google spreadsheets for some reason, there may be some protections on the spreadsheet that disappear in Google. So just be aware and be very careful of what you're doing. Now I'm finding this text to be a little small on my screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is come down here to the very bottom of the Excel spreadsheet. You see here how it's at 100%. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so that I can read these a little more easily, and maybe you guys can read them as well. Also, this big ribbon up here I find distracting. I'm going to go ahead and click this right caret over here to collapse that ribbon. That'll give us just a little more screen room right here. That feels a little more comfortable. Fabulous. Okay, always make sure that you save this document. As soon as you have downloaded it, save it to your computer or your server or your cloud or wherever you do this, right? Please, please don't make the mistake of downloading and entering data and not saving, because you're gonna feel pain in your heart, and I will feel it for you. So make sure you save regularly on a regular basis. When you open the spreadsheet, it always comes up to the instructions page. You'll see there are 3 tabs. If we look down here at the bottom, instructions and definitions, then there's the survey tab, and then the branches if your library has branches. But it will open up to this instructions and definitions page. And it always starts with what's new. So if you're unsure, is it new this year? Always take a look up here. Let me figure out what's new. So it describes the new questions, some new themes that are happening, SimplyE questions, great reminders here, information about the new columns, telling you whether it's a Connecticut question or a national question. So good reminders right here in the form itself. And then these bullet points some great additional reminders. Here's your deadline right here in bold. Fabulous. A reminder, answer all the questions, a reminder about the pre-filled answers. Here's that Zoom feature that we just did, this page about definitions. And there are some pop-up boxes within the survey form itself. I'll show you what those look like, but those pop-up boxes have additional information right there in the form. You can always take a look at that, and then always come back to this page for the definitions to look for more info as well. There's a very important certification question at the end of the form that has to be answered correctly in order to be for your form to be accepted. And there's some information about how to get rid of those little pop-up boxes. Here's a reminder about the dates covered by this fiscal year and my contact info right there. And then as we scroll down, there's 7 or 7.5 pages of definitions. You could read them all. It's like reading a dictionary, deadly dull in some ways. You could print them off and use them for reference. That's a great way to do it. I often find myself just doing a keyword search. So little control F here. Maybe I want to find information about the ARPA money that we got. So just control F, find ARPA, and it pops me right down here to this definition, this question 8.6, federal income. So that's going to tell me a little bit more about my ARPA grant, how to take care of that, how to account for that in the form. So that control F is a big help. I think that's all I wanted to tell you here. So let's hop over to the survey itself. This is what the survey form looks like. This column here, this is the new column, the very first one on the left-hand side. This is where you'll be able to see whether a question is specific to Connecticut. So CT seems to make sense as a Connecticut specific question. US seemed to make sense to me to indicate a national question. That is a nationwide thing that we are reporting in the public library survey to IMLS. So if it says US, that gets bumped up to IMLS. And then there's also F. And that was the best I could come up with to be sort of a feeder question into a federal question. So feeder into a national US question. And you'll see that it particularly comes into play with some of the programs. Here, these feeder questions feed into a total that we come up with. That's something that I report to IMLS. So that's just a new column as a reminder. And also some recently added features. Your answers column is here, but then your reminder column is right here, just to the right of the answers. So if you have skipped a question and didn't answer it, you'll see this reminder here, answer needed. If you send me a report with incomplete questions that still say answer needed, I'm going to send that report back to you to go ahead and complete those questions so that it's all done, that there are no remaining questions to be answered. Also to the right, you'll see that your last year's answers are here, and then your answers from 2 years ago will be in the next column. So that gives you 2 years of context, so you can kind of see what you answered a while ago and how your new answer kind of fits into that. And then this column is for your notes. This is optional, but it's a great way to leave those reminders for yourself, those little breadcrumbs, so that you can remember a year from now how you got to that information. If you want, you can send me a clean copy of the annual report where that column is blank and keep yourself a filled-in copy. You can send me all of the answers. I don't care. Like, I don't care what you put in that column. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't show up anywhere else. I completely disregard it. So you can leave that information in there if you want to, but it's just a handy little place for you to keep track of things. I find it reassuring actually when I see notes in there, because that gives me confidence that there is a methodical and consistent approach to those questions. So I do appreciate that. All right, so we're just gonna give this a start. Let's see, let's pick Hartford because they are a complex system with multiple branches and a bookmobile. So we'll get to see how all of these questions work. And you'll see as soon as I picked a library up here, answers started filling in, right? So last year's answers and 2 years ago, those answers are right here in these columns. And some of these answers are pre-filled because they're generally consistent from year to year, right? Your library name doesn't change. It's unusual that a street address would change. So those are filled in, and you can go ahead and change them if you need to. Say that I started working at Hartford instead. Whoops. And I could just change. Come on, you. I could just change and add my own name there. You could do that, right? And then you'll see here, as I put in an answer, that answer needed disappeared. So it's been filled in, that question is accounted for, everything's good. So those are handy little reminders. Let's take a look at these pop-ups, right? So here you'll see on question 1.112, square feet of main library, it's got that tiny little red triangle in the upper right corner of the box. And yes, it's subtle. And I don't know any way in Excel to make that more pronounced. I think that's an Excel setting. But anytime you see that little red triangle and you hover over that square, you'll see that a pop-up box comes up and gives you more information to help you answer that specific question. So this might be a definition, it might be more details, but these pop-up boxes are right there to help you out right there in the survey. So please do take a look at those. When Tom Newman, my predecessor, put this form together, he was very thorough and he put a lot of information in the pop-up boxes and a lot of information on the instructions and definition sheet with the intent of answering most of the questions that he was getting from directors. So he really tried to anticipate the kind of questions that you guys would ask, and he answered them in the form. So most of the time when people send me questions, the answer is already here. And I often refer people back to the form and say, hover over that pop-up box in question 1.13 and you'll see the details you're looking for. So remember to look here in the form first, always. Now let's also look, there are some drop-down boxes. So sometimes there are multiple choice answers, and we've provided sort of a controlled vocabulary for how you respond to those so that it makes the data easier to collate on my end when I get 178 or 179 responses, that the yeses are all entered the same way and the maybes, and we've got some consistent terminology here. So you'll see here, choose from the drop-down menu. Anytime you click in a cell that has a controlled vocabulary, you'll see that and you'll be able to pick one of these choices. So good, we're all set there. Oh, let's pick it. No, okay, great. What else do I want to tell you? Oh, as we scroll down, I'm going to find an example of this. These two questions, 1.32 and 1.33, you'll see right here this notation right at the beginning of the question that says it's new this year. And you may also see questions that have been clarified this year or edited this year or previous year. And that's a new notation that I started putting in there just to draw your attention to those questions. It's sort of an extra emphasis to say, okay, this is something you haven't seen before and you need to pay attention to it, or this thing has changed and you still need to pay attention to it. So take a look for those, new or edited or clarified. So that'll help you out with those. Now, as you're zipping through this form, if you need to hop ahead to another section or a previous section, these little arrows will scoot you through really quickly to get you back to back. And we'll go previous, just scoots right up. Kind of depends on how big your screen is too. Let's see, another thing I want to point out as we scroll down are these boxes shaded in blue. These are formulas. So if I click on that and take a look at the formula bar here up at the top, yep, you can see that this is a sum of 3 of these other cells. So any blue shaded box is automatically going to update depending on what you type into these boxes, just like that. So please don't mess with the blue boxes, right? So if you have uploaded your form to Google Sheets, be very careful that you are allowing that formula to do its work and that you're not changing that formula. Because we need it to do its own job. It saves you from having to do math, and it just keeps it all cleaner for everybody as we go along. All right. So that's sort of generally how to move around, some of the features of the form, some of the features of Excel. Now I want to start getting into specific questions. So I'm going to scroll back up to the first section. We will talk about some specific questions in the form that I often get queries about from you guys. Or that I want to draw your attention to. And this one, 1.12, let me scroll up a little too far. 1.12, square feet of main library. This is worth double checking periodically, just to make sure you've got an accurate number, that it's the area on all floors enclosed by the outer wall of the library. This can include your basement. This can include mechanical rooms, workrooms, that kind of thing, even if it's off limits to the public. And this question is important. Square feet of your library is important because that can affect how much E-rate funding your library is eligible for in category 2. So as more libraries are becoming SEPA compliant this year and in future years, more libraries are eligible to apply for E-rate funding, not just for your internet service, but for actual hardware to improve your connectivity within the building. And a lot of those calculations are based on the square footage of your library. So it's worth your while to update that number if you haven't in a while. Okay, let's scroll down a little. I want to point out question 1.30. This is something we started last year. So these two questions, 1.30 and 1.31. These are kind of COVID related questions about curbside pickup, new last year. They're open-ended, they're optional. This is just a place for you to drop those numbers if you have been collecting them. So if your library offered curbside pickup or vestibule or lobby or locker pickup, like however you name that thing, which is where you pull stuff out and people come by at their convenience and pick it up outside, then you can go ahead and enter some dates when you offered that service and whether you offered it to residents or non-residents as well. So take a look at those. Also, these new questions, library website URL. This is a question I get all the time. Do I have a directory of library websites in Connecticut? I actually don't. So I just need you guys to send me the info and I'll put it in the directory. Another one, this question 1.33 that I stole from other states is a big open-ended question, just asking about something your library did that you're proud of. This is a great chance to toot your own horn and tell us amazing things, whether it was a program you did or feedback you got from a patron or something that happened over the past year that you're proud of. There must be at least one thing over that 12-month period that you'd like to share with the rest of the world. Please type it in here. If you have any photos or any additional documentation, just send it along to me with your annual report in the email. I've gotten a few responses to this and they're fun. You know, and I don't know yet how we're going to use this. Honestly, it could show up on a Facebook post from the state library, or it could show up as we're talking about the importance of public libraries in Connecticut. These may be examples that we're using. I don't know yet, but I'm talking with my coworker Ashley Sklar about those stories and how we can really highlight the great work that you guys are doing. So we just need to hear from you what those are. All right, we're going to scroll down. Section 2, library services. Let me pop back up here. Here's this reminder. So right at the beginning of this section, of each section, there's usually a reminder about the dates that you're going to use to answer these questions. So these are fiscal year questions over the whole course of the year. And as we scroll down, question 2.1, annual public service hours. So this one and the one below, 2.2, about weeks the building was open. IMLS is being very particular about saying the building is open to the public. And what they mean by that is your physical structure allowed members of the public to come in. So if a patron or anybody opened the front door or opened a door and crossed your threshold into the building, that's counting as your building being open for annual public service hours. People are coming in, go ahead and count that. And that reminder here, don't include hours when it was only your staff working inside the building and patrons could not come in, right? I know that you were all working hard during the pandemic. Everybody was really putting in the hours, which is great. But IMLS just wants right here public service hours for when the building was open to patrons. So be careful as you're counting those hours and counting those weeks that the building was open to the public as well. Just take a look at those. And these numbers will relate to another question in section 6 about the number of weeks your library was closed because of the COVID pandemic. So some of those numbers do kind of add up together. Let's see as we scroll down, 2.5, total annual library visits. So again, this is the number of people who entered the building. So if they're outside just doing curbside pickup, unfortunately, you don't get to count them. You're just counting people who actually crossed your threshold and entered your library building. And as we go forward, you can count other people in there. So if there's not just patrons, like the water delivery guy or the copier repair person, those can count as library visits as well. So put everybody in there in 2.5. Scrolling down a little bit, let's talk about 2.15. This is a question about the number of Wi-Fi sessions. And in previous years, only a third of Connecticut libraries could answer this question, which kind of breaks my heart because we know that the number of computers, public access computers throughout the state has been declining gradually in recent years. We know that the number of sessions using those public computers has been declining in recent years, but I am pretty certain that the number of Wi-Fi sessions, the number of people who are accessing your library's wireless have been going up. And I'm not getting the numbers that I need from you guys in order to document that and in order to show that to people. Wi-Fi is increasingly an important service that public libraries are offering. So I really do strongly encourage you to figure out how you can start tracking this number of Wi-Fi sessions using your library network over the coming years. As we head into more pandemics and more library closures, again, Wi-Fi use is a really important number. So please, please, please take a look at that. If you can find any money or any support or any friends' money or board money to help you solve this and figure out how to capture that number, please do that. Now going down to 2.16, the reference transactions. Just pointing out that this definition was slightly updated last year, so be sure to take a look at it. And remember that reference transactions is not platform specific, right? So reference transactions includes people you talk to in person as well as on the phone, in instant messaging, in text, in chat, in video calls. If it's a reference transaction, it doesn't matter how it happens. So make sure you're counting all of those. I see a question in the chat. Thank you. People tell me it's difficult to do. Do you have methods that work to count Wi-Fi sessions? Christine, I'll have to get back to you. There is information on our LibGuides about how to count Wi-Fi sessions. Yep, it may cost you a little money, but there are at least a third of Connecticut public libraries who can do it. So I know it can be done. So I do encourage people to do it. I will get back to you. I'll save this chat and get back to you about where you can find that information on our LibGuides. All right, scrolling down, we go down, just pointing out here the link to the branch and bookmobile questions. Let's click on that and you'll see it pops us over to the branches sheet. So we're on a different sheet right now answering questions. Hartford luckily has a bookmobile, so they would answer these questions here about the bookmobile. And then scrolling down, answer questions about the branches. And these questions about public service hours have the same rules at the branch as you do at the main library. Number of weeks your branch was open, number of weeks your branch was closed due to coronavirus, and your public occupancy practices. So be sure you're answering all your bookmobile and branch questions. Let's hop back to the survey. So a question in the chat, do you count branch reference questions in addition to the main library survey? Yep. So that's kind of the funny thing about the branches. There's a whole separate sheet for the hours they're open and the weeks they're open and the weeks they're closed and all of that. But then all of the other questions get lumped together. So reference, circulation, programs, collections, all of those numbers should be aggregates of your main library and all of your branches. So keep that in mind if you're in a system with more than one location, that you should be kind of collating and summing up all of those numbers from all of your locations and answering them together in one spot here. Okay. We also want to look at all the program questions. So this is the year when program and activity questions exploded, and now there's many of them. So IMLS, 2 years ago, we just had programs for kids, programs for teens, programs for adults, programs for everybody else. And now we have it broken out by in-person on-site or in-person off-site or live virtual or pre-recorded and on-demand programs. So there's 4 different kind of programs, and there's also self-directed activities. Again, I have numerous webinars about that and an entire page of information about programs and activities. So I'm not going to repeat that. I will encourage you to take a look at those if you haven't already. But you'll see here in the form that the program questions are grouped together, and then the attendance questions are grouped together by age. This year we're doing children 0 to 11 kind of grouped together. But next year, that's going to get split apart. IMLS wants to see that in 2 different age ranges. So next year, we're going to start with ages 0 to 5 and ages 6 to 11. So children are going to get split up again. But we will still have young adults and adults and all others. So let me, as I scroll down, there's this section for all other programs. That's everybody else, right? An intergenerational, a family program, an all ages program, however you want to term it. And the standard example of this might be a chess club, right? Because all ages are welcome to chess club, and you sometimes get kids and teenagers in addition to adults. So that's a fabulous intergenerational program. Another example could be perhaps a PG movie that all ages come to, because it's got that kind of appeal. It's not a kid movie, it's just a PG movie that has a lot of appeal for everybody. So that might be an intergenerational kind of other program that you would count here. So lots of great program info. And again, I recommend that you use the program and activity tracking spreadsheet to help you with that. It's going to be a lot easier as we do these annual reports. So let's see, we talked about that. These again, see these blue boxes, right? So remember that indicates a formula in those boxes. It will automatically calculate for you depending on the numbers that you typed in above. So here we can see the total number of synchronous programs that we did. And this happened to be just the kids, was 155. So you'll see how that number adds up. Great stuff. Okay, we're going to scroll down a little further. Here's all the self-directed activities down here at the bottom. You'll see there's the number of activities first, and then the number of participants right down there. So lots of new questions. Take a look at those, spend a little time. And that's another great opportunity to use those notes to yourself, right? So that question, there's a whole column with where you can put your notes. So great place to do that. Whoops. This keeps getting away from me. Now collections, section 3 here. Just want to point out this box. So these are your holdings as of June 30th. So that's a great time to start getting those counts. Don't include anything that you borrowed or you have temporarily, such as items you borrowed from the service center or if you participate in a CLC swap or a circuit, don't count those items either. It's just things that your library owns. Okay, I want to scroll down and specifically talk about question 3.18 as we go. These databases and electronic collections. See, there's that big old pop-up definition. If you're on a bigger screen, you'll be able to see the whole box. But there's information in here. This includes all your traditional databases like newspapers, consumer reports, if you have some other kind of database that you provide, plus all your collections like Freegal, Hoopla, IndieFlix, Gale Virtual Reference Library. You're going to count all of those in question 3.18. That's where those go. You'll see I've already filled in for you the number of databases that your patrons have access to through research that are provided by the state of Connecticut. So that number's there for you. Now, what else do I want to talk about? 3.21. So nationwide, IMLS collects the number of successful retrievals from databases. And this is sort of the number of articles or content or descriptive records that people look at. It's really, it can be a hard number to get to. And there's so many databases that it's hard to guide you on all of them. And then they change what numbers they collect and how they report and what they call everything. So this is a sticky question. It's tough. Successful retrieval from databases can be hard to find. So if you can answer this question, please do. Count whatever makes sense to you to fit into this definition, and keep notes for yourself about what you included so that, again, you can be consistent next year and count the same things. I have never worked with electronic resources, so I find this question difficult in terms of responding to questions I get from people about how do I count this? How do I count this? And I often have to say, I don't know, because I can't see the back end that you guys can see. So just read the definition and do your best to respond and count the things that IMLS seems to be looking for. That's my best guidance on that one. All right, scrolling down section 4, this is all circulation, and this is circulation during the entire fiscal year. So make sure you're counting that. Here are some instructions that apply to all of section 4. This question 4.0, does your library automatically renew physical items? This is generally a setting within your ILS where you have automatic renewals. Some libraries do, some libraries don't. This is just a yes or no question, a drop-down menu. You'll just pick either yes or no. Hopefully that's an easy one. With the rest of this, in terms of your collection, physical items and electronic items, this should be something that your consortium can help you with if you belong to one. So this may be the benefit, one of the benefits of a consortium. Get them to run these reports in your ILS for you. They should have prepackaged reports for all of their consortium members to be able to send you this information that you can plug into the annual report. So get your consortium working for you. And you'll see there's physical items here, circulation, and as we scroll down, there's circulation of electronic items. This was a transition year for the state library. We had the RB digital books for half of the year. So I grabbed those numbers, those circulation numbers for ebooks and e-audio and put them in for your library. So those are pre-populated. But then remember, RB Digital kind of ceased operations and we switched everything over to SimplyE. So there is a question a little farther down here, 4.40A, for libraries that participate in SimplyE, asking you to go in and get your checkout numbers, your circulation numbers for your patrons. And Brad Bullis has supplied a handy little LibGuide with instructions on how to find that. If we hover over it and you see in the pop-up box, there at the bottom of the pop-up box is the URL for how to find information about how to get your stats in SimplyE. The downside is that Brad does not have one single administrative interface where he can get everybody's numbers and just feed them to me. Unfortunately, each library currently has to log on and get those numbers for themselves. This is something, again, I encourage you to do each month. Just be checking those SimplyE checkouts and add them to your own monthly stats. And currently right now, SimplyE does not distinguish the format. So they kind of lump ebooks and e-audio together all in one report. So that's why we're just asking for one number of SimplyE checkouts. Phew. Now let me backtrack to downloadable audio. This is also a question I get, is how do I count and where do I count songs, right? So if you offer a service where people can download and stream songs, you will count those in 4.34 other, because there's no age level for the song, can be listened to by anybody. But again, your streamed and downloaded songs are going to get counted as downloadable audio circs in 4.34. So pop those in there. Super, thank you, Kim. I see Kim in the chat put in the URL for how to find your stats in Ego. That's a big help, thank you. I also want to point out down here as we scroll down a little bit about interlibrary loans, there are still these questions about ILLs. So the number of items your library borrowed from another library and the number of items your library lent to other libraries, those are still here. There's this clarification about what is included in there. So again, don't include things you borrowed from us or borrowed through your circuit or your swap, and don't include borrow it. So as a reminder, borrow it transactions are when a person, an actual person who does not live in your town, walks into your library and borrows something that's on your shelf. That's a borrow it transaction. So your library is loaning specifically to a non-resident, and they are presenting their own home library card as a borrow it card, and your library is lending to them because you participate in borrow it. An ILL transaction instead is a loan to another library or a borrow from another library. So that's library to library is interlibrary loan. So that's how you'll distinguish those. Those numbers remain the same. All right, we're scrolling down to the staff section. This really gets a lot of use by people. I know it can be a little weird to enter everybody's salaries in here, but this is a section that a lot of people find to be very useful, particularly if you're in the position of being able to advertise for an open job or create a new job. It's really helpful to go to the statistical profile and see comparably what are people being paid for that kind of job in your region or at your type of library. So these numbers are really helpful. If you can type them in as an hourly rate, which you'll see in last year and 2 years ago, that's really helpful because that's easier for people to compare. If you can only put in a salary range, do that, and I'll try and do the math for you based on the number of hours in the work week. Question in the chat, how would we see the number of borrow-its? That's a number that your library should be collecting. So each month you should be checking in your ILS for circulation transactions to people who are not residents of your town, and you'll be keeping those numbers. There's a form specifically available on the LibGuides for tracking borrow-it. And in early March, I think everybody sends me their borrow-it report forms, and we calculate your borrow-it payment. So there's separate information on our website about borrow-it. Okay, I want to point out, as we are in the staff section here, questions 5.13, like children's librarian, and 5.14, reference on adult services. Sometimes people say, should I put the department head salary there, or should I put a reference librarian one? Like, what salary should I put there? And I say, I don't know, what'd you put last year? So again, this is where you document and say, I use either the department head or I use an average of the reference department salaries, some indication for yourself of how you came up with these numbers. Could be starting salary or the salary range for the newest person to the most senior person. That's really up to you guys. So this is again where we strive for consistency from year to year. So keep notes, remind yourself how you did this from year to year, but try and keep to the same pattern as what you have done in the past. Unless that pattern was wrong, and then feel free to fix it. Accuracy is also very important, so please be accurate. A question in the chat. So the number has to subtract that from the total circ number. Francie, maybe we can follow up with each other afterward, and I can understand more about what you're asking there in terms of circulation and borrow it and ILLs. Yeah, I'm going to save the chat and follow up with you. Great. All right, let's scroll down to section 6. And you'll remember these are all the COVID questions. These were new last year, but now the questions we're answering are for this fiscal year. They're mostly yes and no. There are fewer of them than there were last year. So take a look at those. I want to scroll down to sections 7 and 8, which are about income. Section 9 is about expenses. Make sure you're counting your income and your expenses in the year in which it actually happened, right? So for your income, count the year in which the money landed in your bank account, right? Don't say, oh yeah, somebody promised me $1 million. You can't count that as income until they actually give you the $1 million, all right? That could be this year, could be next year, could be over 2 years. But count your income when you received it. Likewise, count your expenses in the year in which you spent them, right? So you might have said, well, we plan to spend $50,000 this year, but we didn't. So that's not an expense, right? So make sure you're actually counting actual income, actual expenses that you can track through data, through financial reports, through bank account records, that kind of thing. So be accurate with those as much as you can. I want to point out question 8.4 about this is federal income, so income from other federal sources. This is where you will include your Everybody Learns money if you received one of those grants. And likewise, if your ARPA money landed in your bank account on June 30 or prior, you'll count it here. If you got it on July 1st or later, you'll report it next year. PPP loans go in here. And importantly, in terms of E-rate funding, most libraries in Connecticut will not report any E-rate funding in this number because you didn't actually get any cash from E-rate, right? Most Connecticut public libraries are getting discounts on their services, which means that you're getting a discounted bill from CEN or your service provider. You're not actually getting any money from the E-rate program. So be very careful how you enter question 8.4 there. I also sometimes get queries from you guys about friends money. How do I count that? So 8.5 here. If your friends have a book sale and then they write a check to the library for $10,000, you're going to enter that income right here, 8.12. That's where that goes. And then wherever you spend that money, you'll report it on expenses. If, however, we'll scroll down to expenditures, your friends pay for something directly. So if you have subscriptions for databases or periodicals or things, and the bill goes to your friends and your friends write a check to the service provider, that's going to get entered in 9.17. So that money is not landing in your bank account. You are not writing a check. It's completely separate from your library. That goes right here, 9.17. They're paid directly by the friends or another library support group. That's an important distinction. What else do I want to say here? I know when we get to the bottom line here, total library costs, total expenditures, total income, sometimes they don't actually match up with what you have on your reports. And I think that's just the wonkiness of the questions that I ask and that we include in this report versus how you manage your finances. So I apologize if they don't match up, but please do your best to answer these questions accurately according to the definitions in the questions. Let's see, circuit fees. Sometimes people ask me where to put their CLC fees. For the swaps, those will go in here, 9.6, all other materials expenditure. Sometimes people ask me about where to put expenses for constant contact, and visionware in their website design. That goes into 9.10, computer hardware, software, systems, telecommunications, yada, 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 yada. That goes in there. And let's see, I'm going to scroll down to section 10. This is the end, yay. So this question right here, 10.5, is the certification. You have to answer yes to this. If you accidentally say no, I'm going to bump it back to you and make you say yes. And then this yellow box at the bottom is where you'll look to see how many questions you still have to answer. This yellow box must be 0 when you send it to me, or I'm going to send it back to you. So that's important to look at. Also, there's my email address so you can find me. And we have this comment box at the bottom. If there's something you'd like to tell me about that was weird or that was unusual or that you had a problem with, just drop it in the comment box and send that back to me. Okay, now let's take a look at the advice I want to share with you in our final 3 minutes here. Please, please, please don't wait until the last minute to start filling out your annual report, because you're going to drive yourself crazy and you're going to drive your coworkers crazy and you're going to get super stressed and it's really not going to be worth it. As a reminder, many of these numbers are things you can and should be tracking month to month throughout the year, right? You should be reporting to your board and your funders about circulation numbers from month to month, or program numbers, or reference numbers, or computer usage. All very manageable if you get it month to month, and then you just add it up at the end of the year, pop those numbers into the annual report, and you're good to go. So I encourage you to keep managing that throughout the year. As I've been saying, use the notes column, or make notes for yourself, or make yourself a binder, whatever is your preferred method for keeping track of how you came up with these numbers, because we are going for consistency from year to year, but also accuracy. And I want to mention often, not often, sometimes a new director comes on board, or a new children's or reference librarian, and they look at the old stats that were reported and say, I have no idea where that person got those numbers. What do I do? And I say, you know what? Push the reset button. Let's stick with accuracy. So double check the definitions, make sure that you are counting things according to the question and the definition. And then we will strive for consistency going forward from that point. So sometimes you'll see in the profiles from year to year, you'll see numbers change. You'll see a trend chart and it changes. And that's usually when somebody new started at the job and they started counting in a more accurate way. That happens. Distribute the workload, right? So if you are in a library where people can help you with counting reference numbers, great, get them to do that. Maybe your circ staff can help you with the circulations. Maybe your tech services people can help you with the collections numbers. You probably have some kind of bookkeeper or finance person who can help you with those income and expense numbers. Get their help, right? That's what they're strong in. That's where their skills are. So distribute all the work on this. And when you get stuck, remember there's definitions in the form and there's pop-up boxes, those little comment boxes. Take a look at there, do your keyword search. There's a lot of information in the form. And then if you're stuck, give me an email or a phone call and we'll talk it through it. But also, right, the final data that I'm putting into the statistical profile and that we're reporting up to IMLS is only as good as what you send me. So again, consistency and accuracy as much as possible. All right, and there's an evaluation here. Again, you're gonna get this link in about an hour or so. But if you wouldn't mind popping into that evaluation form and just let me know how the webinar went for you today, if there's something that I can address more or change. I have sometimes changed webinar content based on those evaluation forms and the feedback you send me. So that's very helpful to me and I encourage you to do that. Otherwise, I have covered everything on my script. I thank you all for being here and spending an hour with me. The recording will be up later today and I will be by my email and by my phone if you have further questions. So thank you all very much, and take care and have a good rest of your day, and happy Friday.